I was cast aside by my own family, left with nothing but a cold goodbye and a small bill. Years later, they returned begging for help after losing everything. But trust is earned, not given. This is the story of betrayal, survival, and finding a family worth fighting for. I want to share my story with you. I walked into the sunlit backyard of my parents' house feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken expectations pressing down on my shoulders. The barbecue sizzled on one side while laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, all directed at my older sister, who was perched on a folding chair like a queen surveying her kingdom. She wore a smug grin, her perfectly styled hair and designer dress already earning whispered compliments from aunts and uncles. I stood in the corner clutching a paper plate, trying to remember the last time I felt welcome here. My plate was half-burnt hot dog and limp potato salad, but the real sting wasn't the food. It was the realization that no matter how much I tried to fit in, I'd always be an afterthought. My sister's achievements were recited like holy scripture. "Did you hear she got straight A's again?" Grandma laughed, patting my sister's perfectly manicured hand. Dad leaned over and said, "If only you applied yourself, you could be half as accomplished." I forced a smile and nodded even though my heart twisted. I wanted to shout that I'd tried everything, hours studying under a flickering lamp, part-time jobs to pay for extra tutoring, only to be told I wasn't good enough. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I grabbed a plastic cup of soda, its fizz a small comfort against the cold dismissal echoing around me. Mom hovered nearby, fanning herself with a napkin as she praised every trivial detail of my sister's existence. "Oh, Emily baked those cupcakes all by herself," she cooed, pointing at a perfect tray of pink frosted treats. I remembered how last year I'd brought homemade cookies to the same gathering, only to have her wrinkle her nose and throw them away in front of me. The memory burned hotter than any slight, but I held on to it, carving it into my mind as proof of my unimportance in this family. My sister, on the other hand, basked in every scrap of attention, her laughter a taunt that I could never achieve the same grace. As the afternoon sun dipped toward evening, cousins ran around with sparklers and someone started telling stories by the patio lights. I tried to join in, offering a joke, a simple observation, but my voice was swallowed by the collective hum of approval for Emily. Her parents listened to every word she said, nodding and beaming as if she had invented joy itself. When she mentioned her plan to apply to a prestigious college next year, cheers erupted, hands clapped, whistles blew, while I stood invisible. That was the moment I realized I wasn't part of their narrative. I was a side note they'd forgotten to include. Later, after the celebration dwindled, my father called me aside. His face was stern, his eyes devoid of the warmth he showed my sister. "You need to figure out what you want to do," he said, voice clipped. "You're not pulling your weight around here." I blinked, wondering if I'd misheard. I just finished mowing the lawn, washed dishes, and chased off a rowdy dog that sneakily raided the dessert table. But none of that mattered. He tossed me a $20 bill and told me to get a job or learn to fend for myself. The words stung more than any open insult because they were delivered in the same tone he used when asking for the salt. I left the yard with burning cheeks, the pile of unspoken apologies and regrets heavier than any baggage I'd ever carried. My sister's laughter followed me down the driveway, echoing like a cruel serenade. I found myself clutching that crumpled bill, pocketing it like a declaration of exile. In the silence of the empty street, I finally felt the weight of their decision to write me off, like a character they'd killed in the first act, too inconvenient to keep around. Their golden child was the rising star, and I was just the shadow, fading further with each passing moment. That night I lay awake on the scratchy couch in the spare room, thinking back to every slight, every cold shoulder. I remembered pretending not to notice how my mother's lips curled when I walked by, how my sister's eyes rolled at my voice, how my father's respect was reserved for someone else. The unfairness of it all ignited something in me, an ember of determination. If they thought I was worthless, I decided then that I'd become undeniable. I would forge my own path beyond their reach, beyond their expectations, until my name shone with its own light. As dawn broke through the curtains, I packed a small bag of clothes, tucked the $20 into my worn jeans, and left without a backward glance. The driveway was empty, the house silent. My sister's world remained untouched by my absence at that moment, but I felt a thrill of freedom coursing through me. Abandoned perhaps, but no longer broken. The shadow of the golden child would no longer define me. I would step into my own story, write my own destiny, one that my family would come to regret letting slip away. The morning the final betrayal landed wasn't thunderous or dramatic. It arrived wrapped in polite words and rehearsed smiles, like a death sentence slipped under my door. I drove back to my hometown skyline, the same road I'd fled years ago, imagining a neutral reunion to check on them, maybe to feel that old familiar hurt one last time so I could truly move beyond it. Instead, I found my parents' kitchen transformed into a war room, maps and folders strewn across the table, and Emily hovering over every detail, her eyes flicking up at me with thinly veiled resentment. My mother offered me the last cup of coffee in the stained mug I always used, but there was no warmth in the gesture, only a calculated distance that made my heart pound with a sick anticipation of what was coming next. My father cleared his throat, folded his arms, and spoke with the precision of a corporate executive announcing layoffs. Son, we've decided to sell the house. We're relocating to Europe to be closer to Emily's new venture. The city's market is booming and she needs our support over there. His words landed on me like iron weights, each syllable a deliberate strike to my chest. Behind him, my mother murmured agreement, nodding as though she were praising her favorite garden flower. And there I stood, the bitter realization taking shape that they had drawn a line in the sand. One side for the golden child, the other an abandoned wasteland where I now stood, officially erased. I swallowed, feeling the air thicken around my lungs. You're selling everything? The question tore through me because this was the home I had paid rent on to keep the lights on when they had turned me out too young to manage. This was the only place I had any roots, any memory of belonging. My voice shook as I forced the words out, but my father merely offered a curt nod. Yes, we'll handle the paperwork next week. We've already contacted an agent. He paused and then, with a chilling calmness, added, we'll transfer ownership directly to Emily. You're welcome to submit a proposal if you want to share, but honestly, it's not what you're interested in. My mother smiled as if she were announcing a surprise party. You should understand, darling, she said, leaning forward to lay a hand on my arm. We have to focus on her future. She's building something extraordinary over there. We can't afford distractions, and frankly, we can't afford you. The betrayal twisted so deep I could barely catch my breath. Their justification was clinical, cold. Emily's success weighed more than my existence. The words I'd anticipated for years, the truth of how they saw me, stuck in my throat as tears blurred my vision. I realized they believed I'd never amount to anything, and now they were proving it by throwing me out of the most fundamental part of their lives. When I tried to argue, to remind them of the summer nights I'd spent fixing that creaky porch, the winter mornings I'd shoveled snow to keep the driveway safe, they cut me off. We helped you when you needed it, my father said, voice firm. Now it's time to move on. My sister's eyes glinted triumphantly, as if she'd been waiting for this moment, for the final cut that made me irrelevant. Their unity in casting me out stung worse than any fight. The shared glance between them was proof that my fate had been decided long ago, that every harsh word and every cold shoulder was leading to today. I stood in that kitchen, the only home I'd ever known, slipping out of my grasp like sand through clenched fists, and felt something break inside me. The part of me that still yearned for approval from people who never loved me shattered. I realized then that they weren't just taking a house or an inheritance, they were stripping away any tie that bound me to that old life. With nothing left there, I understood I had become exactly what they always wanted, expendable, unworthy, forgotten. I walked out with my head held high, my footsteps echoing down the hallway where every family portrait once hovered. I clasped the door handle, glanced back at the faces that had once shared my blood, and saw no recognition, no regret, just the cold certainty that I was no longer their problem. When I closed the door behind me, the click felt like the final verdict. I exhaled, feeling the weight of their rejection settle around my shoulders like a mantle I would never wear again. But in that moment of utter abandonment, a different resolve ignited, one that said I would build something of my own, something that would never let anyone else define or discard me so easily. The first winter after they kicked me out was the hardest. I had nowhere warm to go at night, just a cheap single mattress in a cramped studio apartment where the heater rattled and barely kept the cold at bay. I washed dishes in a greasy diner for $12 an hour, slipping on wet floors, listening to customers complain about burnt toast. I ate the cheapest instant noodles I could buy, one packet per meal, stretching each serving with water until the flavor barely existed. I felt invisible everywhere I went, haunted by the echo of my family's final words as if they burned in my mind. You're no longer our problem. The loneliness was suffocating, but it was also the forge that hardened me. From dawn to dusk, I worked every job I could find. I delivered pizzas, cleaned offices in the dead of night, and stocked shelves at a warehouse until my back ached so badly I wondered if I'd ever stand straight again. At first, progress was microscopic, paying rent, covering utilities, then maybe saving $10 in a month. But day by day, tiny victories accumulated. I learned to rise before sunrise, to hammer out a budget and stick to it, to fix my old rusted car myself with guidance from online tutorials because I couldn't afford a mechanic. Every dollar I saved felt like a blow against the memory of my parents' cold dismissal. I was proving to myself that I could survive without their approval. In those years, I felt like a ghost slipping through the city streets. I had no friends who understood this kind of hunger, no family to call. Most nights I sat in my empty apartment, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, wondering if I would ever feel at home anywhere. Then one evening I met Laura. She was stacking books in a small bookstore where I delivered boxes of inventory. Her smile was gentle, her eyes curious, and she listened when I told her my story without pity or judgment. Over coffee after my shift, she asked about my dreams instead of my past mistakes. She believed in me in a way I had never allowed myself to believe. That simple act of kindness cracked open something inside me, a hope I'd buried under years of rejection. Together, we started to dream bigger. I used what little savings I had to buy an old printer and a second-hand laptop, then rented a tiny corner of an office building to launch a small printing and design service. I worked on proposals at night, designing business cards and flyers for local shops and charities. At first, the clients trickled in slowly, but I poured every ounce of my energy into delivering quality work and building relationships. Laura handled the books and customer calls, her steady voice giving clients confidence that this scrappy newcomer was here to stay. I learned to navigate setbacks, a faulty printer head that swallowed a week's worth of work, a big client who stiffed me on payment, but each failure taught me something valuable about resilience and persistence. As the years passed, our little company grew. We hired one employee, then another, all people who'd been overlooked somewhere along the way, hungry for a chance. We moved into a brighter office space with framed posters on the walls and a coffee machine that didn't taste like swamp water. Laura and I got married under a canopy of string lights in a small park, surrounded by the handful of friends and colleagues who had cheered us on from day one. When our daughter was born, I held her in my arms and promised that she would never feel the cold absence of abandonment that had once cost me so much. I finally understood what family could be when it was built on love and mutual respect rather than favoritism and fear. Then came the real proof of our success. One evening, over dinner at our home where the walls were painted a warm yellow and children's laughter filled the air, Laura handed me the mail, a thick envelope from a prominent marketing firm offering to buy our company. My heart pounded as I opened the letter, expecting a rejection, but instead finding congratulations and an acquisition proposal that would change our lives. In that moment, I felt the weight of every sleepless night and every moment of doubt lift off my shoulders. I had built something from nothing, not to prove to my family, but to prove to myself that I was worthy of an honest, fulfilling life. Looking around the table at my wife and daughter, I realized that the real triumph wasn't the money or the company name on a building downtown. It was the family we'd created together, one that celebrated every success and held each other through every failure. The hunger that had driven me out of my childhood home had led me to a place of warmth and belonging. I had risen from the ashes of their betrayal stronger than they could ever imagine, and I knew that this new life, built from scratch, was mine and mine alone. I was halfway through dinner when the email popped up on my phone, a client inquiry forwarded by Laura sent from an address I'd never seen before. The subject line read, "Urgent Family Emergency." I frowned, fingers pausing over the screen because in a decade there hadn't been a single word from my parents or Emily. I tapped it open. The message wasn't polite or tentative. It was blunt, laced with panic and entitlement. "We need your help now. We're in trouble. You're our only hope." My chest tightened as I read. I glanced at Laura, who waited patiently, sensing my unease. "What is it?" she asked quietly. I scrolled down to the attachments. A glossy recent news article announcing that my parents' business had declared bankruptcy after a disastrous investment. Another link to Emily's public statement admitting her startup had collapsed under debt and mismanagement. The photos showed them looking gaunt and defeated, standing outside their once-grand office building now shuttered and covered in auction notices. I felt a cold surge of satisfaction mixed with disbelief. They had spent years writing me off as worthless, and now they were scrambling to the only person they'd abandoned who had the means to save them. I read on. The email demanded a loan, no questions asked. There was an ultimatum: help us within 24 hours or watch everything we own disappear. In that moment, the walls of our dining room, painted in warm tones and adorned with family photos of Laura and our daughter, felt like a fortress protecting me from the ghosts of my past. I took a deep breath, imagining how I'd feel if I'd never built this life, if I were still freezing on that ratty studio couch, begging for scraps of kindness that never came. I would have killed for this chance, but that wasn't the point anymore. I pressed play on the video attachment. My father's voice crackled through the speakers, dripping with a false humility I'd heard before. "Son," he began, "we don't know where else to turn. We were so proud when you walked away. We never imagined you'd become this. We need your help." My heart pounded as I watched his rigid posture, the way Mother's trembling lip betrayed her grief. Emily appeared beside them, eyes red-rimmed as if she'd cried for days. She mouthed the same words, "Help us." Their combined shame and desperation felt like a rope pulling at my memory, every wounded moment, every harsh word, every cold shoulder. I closed the laptop and stood up, walking into the living room where our daughter played quietly with her blocks. She looked up and smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. Laura joined me, her hand resting on my shoulder. "What is it?" she asked again, softer this time. I told her everything, the bankruptcy, the email, the video. Her eyes darkened with anger but also with fierce loyalty. "They abandoned you," she said. "They let you go when you needed them most." I nodded, recalling the final betrayal in that sterile kitchen, their unity in discarding me as if I'd never mattered. But seeing their faces now tattered by ruin, I felt only the hard clarity of survival. I had built this life for a reason, not to punish them, but to prove I could thrive on my own terms. I closed the laptop, logging out. "We won't be writing back," I said, voice steady. Laura squeezed my hand. That night I lay awake, listening to the rain against our window, recalling my parents' words, "You're no longer our problem." At the time, those words had felt like a death sentence. Now they sounded like an obituary of a family that had failed to love. Emily's venture collapsing, their bankruptcy headlines, it was poetic in its own brutal way. The world had a way of balancing scales. The next morning, I sat at my desk and drafted a brief response. I wrote, "I'm sorry you're in trouble. I've moved forward with my life and I'm not willing to revisit the past that abandoned me. I wish you luck, but I cannot help. No love lost, no reconciliation possible." Then I hit send. The finality of those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. A week later, the news cycle moved on. My parents and Emily vanished from the headlines as quickly as they'd appeared. I never heard from them again. Meanwhile, my own life marched on. Our company landed a major contract, our daughter learned to ride a bike, and Laura and I started planning a family trip overseas. The memories of their plea lingered like a faded photograph, reminders of how far I'd come. They had returned when they needed me, but I had already chosen my family, built not by blood, but by the love and respect we shared every day. Their ghosts no longer haunted me. I had risen, and I refused to look back at the ashes they left behind. They started innocently enough with a single text from my mother, "My daughter, your daughter is beautiful and looks so much like you. How grateful we are to see how well you are doing. Remorse, sorry. We never saw it before. Love you, son." Their words flooded my phone. Over the next days, first an email from Dad, "My heart aches for the distance between us. I have been a fool. He wanted to come visit. Said he missed out on your life." Then from my sister, "Emily, I wish I had protected you instead of sacrificing you. I am so proud of what you've built. Please forgive me. All of it was so easy to mistake for real regret." I nearly believed them when they asked for family photos and updates on my wife and child. They wanted to know what school she attended, which friend groups she liked, how she was adjusting to second grade. They asked if they could send holiday gifts, small thoughtful toys, books that she might like. We all know how meaningful that kind of gesture can be. It melted a small piece of my heart that had been locked away since childhood. Meanwhile, my inbox filled with messages from extended relatives, aunts, cousins, second cousins. Once removed, they said they had spoken to Mom, Dad, and Emily, and they wanted to reconnect too. Would I please come to Thanksgiving dinner at Grandma's with my family Sunday at noon? They would love to see my daughter after all these years. They promised it would be nice. We had only met some of them once when I was a kid, but that didn't stop them from showering me with congratulations on my business success, invitations to family reunions, virtual calls, groups on social media. They created a Facebook group titled Welcome Home, where they posted old pictures of me as a child, birthday parties, school events, even a baby photo of me sleeping in a crib next to Emily with captions, "Love always wins." You could feel the sticky sweetness of it suffocating me. Their love bombing campaign was relentless and almost hypnotic, like flies around a honeypot. I started to respond politely at first, sharing candid shots of my daughter's art projects, a school photo smiling next to her best friend, then some casual updates about our new home renovations and upcoming vacation plans. They adored it all. They forwarded the updates to each other, gushed over every crooked letter my daughter drew. They even began sending hefty care packages to our doorstep, tins of butter cookies, blankets, winter jackets, and then small checks with simple notes, "Hope this helps Zoxo." At one point, one of my uncles invest in our company not because he believed in our mission, but because he wanted to be part of our success story. He bragged about his connections in the local chamber of commerce and promised visits on business days. They wanted to host us at their houses for weekend barbecues. They begged for seats on our annual gala's VIP list. So many voices, each saying how awful it was that we had been estranged. They framed themselves as the victims. Apologies mingled with flattery. "I can't believe how you've become. We are in awe of your drive. Your story fought through many tears here." They wanted to stand beside me at conferences, speak my name to prestigious clients. They enlisted pastors at our church to spread word how the prodigal son returned. What a miracle. Forgive us, they preached Sunday after Sunday. But toward the end, the undertone shifted. Their emails grew more insistent, their text messages more layered with guilt trips. "We can't lose you again. If you don't show up, our hearts will break. You're the Missing piece of our family puzzle, you owe it to us, you owe it to yourself to let us back in suddenly. I recognized the pattern. They weren't building bridges, they were mining for leverage. They asked for introductions to my investors, translucent offers of help. In exchange for referrals, they pressed for my financial statements under the guise of family curiosity. They needed favors, school pickups, babysitting, care for my daughter. When my wife was busy, they wanted to sit on my company board supposedly as mentors. Though they had no experience, they mentioned that seeing me succeed was pointless. If I cut them out, they promised that wrenched in treaty would break our poor grandmother's heart. When she talked about us, they used relatives as flying monkeys to attack my boundaries through the new family I had created. They painted themselves as the victims even as they maneuvered to insert themselves into every facet of my life. I watched it unfold, a slow revelation of their true motive. They never wanted forgiveness or reconciliation. They wanted a stake in my success, my world, my company, my wife and child. Became their new cash cow. Their apologies were nothing but calculated steps in a manipulative dance. They had learned nothing from the past, except how to use love as a weapon. I realized then that the only answer was silence. I refused to let their cloying affection turn into fresh scars. I would not fall for their campaign again. Their love bombing had revealed their true colors, and I would not give them back the power they once took from me by simply turning and walking away forever. I heard the knock at the door before I saw their faces, 3 sharp taps that carried the weight of entitlement and obligation. I opened it to find my father standing stiffly on the porch, his shoulders too square like he'd practiced this posture in front of a mirror. My mother hovered behind him, her mascara smudged as if she'd cried on the drive over, and Emily stood to the side, arms folded, her designer bag hanging like a badge of survival despite her own bankruptcy. They looked tentatively hopeful, as though they expected me to sweep them into the house with tears of joy. Instead, I led them into the living room, where Laura and our daughter sat quietly on the sofa, coloring books strewn across the coffee table. I closed the door behind them without a word. My father cleared his throat, glancing at the framed family photos of me as a kid before their neglect lined up on the mantel. He tried for a conciliatory tone. "We're so sorry for everything," he began. "We've been through hell these past months. We lost everything. We're ashamed we ever left you and we want to make amends." My mother sniffed, offering a shaky smile and looking to me for forgiveness she had no right to ask. Emily took a deep breath and added, "I've made mistakes too. I was blind to how much you suffered. I'm so sorry, brother." The charade could have been convincing if I hadn't lived through every betrayal, witnessed every calculated move in their love bombing campaign. I crossed my arms and waited. My wife watched from the couch, her eyes cool and steady. Our daughter glanced up, sensing the tension. Finally, my father sighed, leaning forward. "We need your help," he said, his voice dropping to a hush. "I've lost our home, all our savings vanished. We're on the brink of foreclosure. Emily's business collapsed and she has mounting debts. We're desperate." My mother held up a trembling hand, her voice quavering as she recited their rehearsed script. "We know we hurt you. We can never take back the past, but we're begging you just this once, help us get back on our feet, alone, a place to stay, anything." Emily chimed in, her tone shrill with urgency. "You have the resources now. You can save us. You're the only one who can." Their pleading eyes flicked to Laura and then to me, expecting compassion or guilt. Instead, I felt only cold clarity. I remembered every unreturned call, every slammed door, every tear I shed alone. I remembered the Christmas mornings when their laughter overshadowed my gifts, the college acceptance announcements they never celebrated, the moment they sold off my childhood home without a thought. These were not people seeking forgiveness. They were opportunists exploiting pain to feed on my success once again. I looked at their faces, so familiar yet unrecognizable in their brazen presumption, and I felt something inside me harden. My father's shoulders sagged as I spoke. "You sold my childhood home without telling me. You abandoned me when I needed you most. You told me I was no longer your problem." I paused, letting the memory linger in the hush. "Now you come here demanding help as if the last 20 years never happened." My words cut through their practiced guilt like a blade. My mother's lips trembled, her mascara glistening under the living room light. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her arms tightening around her bag strap. My wife rose and stood beside me, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. "We've built this life together from scratch," she said softly. "We don't owe you anything. We have our own family to protect." Our daughter looked up at her mother, then at her grandparents, uncertain why these strangers stood in our house. The parents' audacious demand had backfired in the face of our united front. My father swallowed hard and attempted one last plea. "Please think of your mother, think of your sister. They're in danger of losing everything." I shook my head. "You chose to build something that didn't include me. You chose Emily over me. You left me with nothing. Now you expect me to bail you out." I stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "Get out." They stood in stunned silence, mouths open. My mother reached for my father's arm as if to steady herself. Emily's eyes shone with unshed tears that smelled of resentment more than regret. My father cleared his throat and mumbled, we thought. His voice trailed off as they backed toward the door, shame and entitlement warring on their faces. When the door clicked shut behind them, the room exhaled. My wife hugged me, our daughter pressed close, and I let the tension drain out of my chest. The audacity of their request had been the final betrayal, their assumption that they could step back into my life with a sob story and an entitled demand. But they had miscalculated the strength I'd gained from every hardship, every lonely night, every step forward I'd taken without them. In the quiet that followed, I realized I felt only relief. The ghosts of my past had made one last appearance and I had banished them for good. Our life remained intact, built on love, respect, and hard-fought independence. They had asked for everything, but they left with nothing, just as they'd intended years ago. This time, I was the one who walked away unbroken. They left my doorstep in a storm of slammed gates and muttered curses, but their silence that followed was far more ominous than any apology. For a week I heard nothing until the first whisper of poison slipped into the wind. It started with a late-night call from my business partner. "I don't know who's whispering this in our clients' ears," he said, voice tight with anger, "but you're supposed to have embezzled funds, ignoring invoices, treating vendors poorly. They're pulling contracts." My heart skipped. How did they learn about invoices only I handled? How did they know just enough to sow doubt? Next morning, I opened my email to find a scathing review on our company's Google page. "Don't trust this guy," it said. "He'll rip you off and leave you in the cold. Used to work for him, stay away." It was 1 star, but within hours dozens more appeared, each sinisterly specific, accusing me of everything from overcharging clients to mistreating employees. Our reputation, painstakingly built over years, was collapsing overnight. I stared at the screen, mind racing. This had to be them. No one else had motive or access to our internal numbers. Then came the letters, handwritten notes slipped under my front door with jagged, hateful scrawls. "Traitor," one read, "we own you blood and bone." Another threatened to expose all your dirty secrets if I didn't resign from the board of directors. The words carried the same sting of betrayal I had known long ago, but now edged with a vindictive fury. Whoever sent them knew my schedule, my routines. They even mocked our daughter's favorite fairy tale, bringing tears to my wife's eyes when I read her the threats. The final blow came when they targeted our freelance designers and copywriters. I received frantic messages, voices ragged, accusing me of sudden payment freezes, abrupt cancellations, and false promises. Some claimed I'd locked them out of our portal without warning. My email box overflowed with demand letters, angry pleas, and legal threats. One designer threatened a lawsuit for breach of contract. My carefully managed cash flow jolted off course as I scrambled to placate, explain, and investigate. Meanwhile, the online reviews spread like wildfire, leaving me scrambling for damage control. I knew before I even opened the latest message who was behind it. My mother's stiff handwriting scrawled across the envelope, a single line inside: "You made us suffer, now we'll make you suffer." Beneath it, a veiled promise: if I didn't answer their call, they'd reveal every mistake I'd made, every time I'd cried alone in a cheap motel room, every lingering doubt I'd ever had in the pit of my stomach. They threatened to leak my personal journaling, my innermost fears, online. They even hinted at sharing pictures of my daughter's school ID, the one I'd always guarded closely. I realized they weren't merely demanding help anymore. They were attempting annihilation, destroying my hard-won reputation, terrorizing my family, and threatening to rip apart the very community we'd built. The masks were gone. Their love bombing had mutated into hatred, as though the one thing they couldn't control was me and my life. They were lashing out in a final tantrum against the existence they'd never wanted me to have. Laura and I sat in our office late into the night, poring over invoices and employee logs, determination burning through our exhaustion. We called Google and other platforms to dispute the fake reviews. We drafted legal letters to silence the slander. We set up two-factor security on every account and changed passwords for every system. I personally called every key client to reassure them, confessing that someone was framing me. By dawn, some contracts were saved, but the cost, time, money, stress was staggering. When I finally confronted my parents in a letter of my own, I felt the anger boil over. I recounted every betrayal, every cold word, every moment they'd turned their backs on me. I told them to stay the hell away from my family, my business, my life. I warned them that any further attack would trigger a lawsuit, criminal defamation, harassment, identity theft. I delivered that letter by certified mail, keeping a copy of the return receipt as proof. In the weeks that followed, the sabotage attempts faltered. Clients returned after hearing my side, our team rallied behind us, and the malicious online posts were gradually removed. We beefed up our security, installed cameras, hired a private investigator to trace the threats. It cost us, but we refused to be cowed. Through it all, I realized this final tantrum was their last attempt to reclaim control. They'd gambled everything on shattering me, but their own fury had revealed the hollowness inside. The same people who abandoned me now despised the autonomy I'd carved out. Their extinction burst, the moment of greatest despair before final closure, only solidified my resolve. I had faced down loneliness, poverty, and ceaseless manipulation. I would not be broken now. As we stood together in our home office, watching the sun rise over a city that knew our name for all the right reasons, I felt a fierce pride. My family, real family, stood beside me. They had seen my worst and stayed. And as for my birth family, their threats and slander would fade into silence, another shadow in the past. Their monstrous colors had been fully exposed, and I would never let them dull the brightness of the life I had fought so hard to build. I sat at my desk late that evening, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating my notes and the stack of letters I'd compiled over the years. Every crumpled apology they'd sent, every eviction notice they'd ignored, every threat they'd scrawled in my mailbox. I breathed deeply, feeling the full weight of my history. The childhood spent watching them heap praise on my sister while I stood forgotten, the day they sold my family home without a word, the nights I cried alone in motels scraping together the rent. I thought of the day they cast me out with $20 and a cold dismissal, believing it would break me. Instead, it ignited a fire. Now, after their recent campaign of terror, false accusations that nearly destroyed my business, threatening letters targeting my wife and daughter, I held in my hands the evidence of their monstrous hypocrisy. They begged for forgiveness with one breath, then tried to annihilate everything I'd built with the next. They presented themselves as victims while orchestrating a smear campaign, slandering my name in the very community I'd nurtured from nothing. Their love bombing was a ruse, their repentance a farce. I realized that any further engagement would only tether me to their greed and entitlement, dragging me back into the darkness they so eagerly invited me to join. I picked up a crisp sheet of paper and began writing, my pen cutting through the noise of their lies with each deliberate word. I recounted the injustices one by one. The early mornings spent cleaning their house for no thanks, the college applications ignored, the Christmas mornings when my mother's joy was reserved for Emily alone. I described the sting of their final betrayal when they sold our home and transferred ownership directly to my sister. My family's birthplace stripped from me like a possession they no longer valued. I laid bare the terror of the last weeks, the emails accusing me of embezzlement, the anonymous posts tarnishing my reputation, the threats against my daughter's safety. Their true faces had been revealed. I addressed them directly, naming each lie they'd told and each apology that evaporated at the first sign of need. I told them that their request for help had never been born of love or remorse, but of raw entitlement and fear of consequence. I explained that the version of family they peddled was conditional, a contract of loyalty they could revoke at will. They had become the mirror image of the neglect and cruelty they once inflicted upon me. I closed the letter with a decisive verdict. I would not contribute another dollar, grant another favor, or allow their shadows anywhere near my life. I emphasized that my peace, hard-won through years of sacrifice and resilience, belonged to my wife and daughter and me alone. I praised the new family we'd built, one founded on mutual respect, gratitude, and unwavering support, and declared that no blood tie could supersede the love we shared. I made it clear that this was my final word. Their chain of influence was forever severed. They would never again darken our doorstep or infiltrate our hearts with false tears. I sent the letter by certified mail and kept a copy for my records, knowing that this tangible boundary would stand against any future entreaty. After sealing the envelope, I turned off the lamp and climbed the stairs to our daughter's room. She slept peacefully, stuffed animal in one arm, curled under a quilt we'd chosen together. My wife stood by the doorway, her hand on my shoulder. I kissed my daughter's forehead and looked at the woman who'd stood by me through every hardship, whose belief in me had healed wounds my family had inflicted. In that moment, I felt more whole than ever, untethered from the past, unafraid of the future. Downstairs, I placed the final letter in the outgoing tray, then sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. The night was quiet, the storm of betrayal finally passing. My heart felt light, free from the burden of their expectations and manipulations. I realized that cutting ties was not an act of vengeance, but an affirmation of self-worth. It was acknowledging that my loyalty and compassion were gifts, not debts to be exploited. As dawn approached, I watched the first rays of sunlight filter through the curtains, illuminating the life we had created from ashes. Our home, full of laughter, art projects, and the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, stood as a testament to our endurance. My family was beside me, unscarred by the greed that had once tried to consume us. Their voices, kind and genuine, filled the space where my old family's deceit once lingered. In that peace, I found my final, unshakable truth. I was not defined by the blood that abandoned me, but by the love I chose to cultivate. The chains were broken, and I would never look back.